an original.
From Story Studio Network.
Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
I clearly had way too much time on my hands over the summer. Finding drops and stuff. Anyway, that kind of fits this week, right? Welcome in. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. Dave Trafford here for Story Studio Network. Keith Leslie here. You hear and see him on CH Television out of Hamilton. And John Wright from Maru Public Opinion. I've been kind of going through all of that, as our friend Taylor Parnaby would have said, are the dispatches from Queen's Park this week, and everything seems to be focused on the drama in the House that is focused on Sarah Jama. And Keith, I don't know where you start. I don't know where you end, because I don't feel like somebody described this like, maybe it was you, John, was like pulling the thread on a woolen sweater. It just keeps going and going and going. And at the end of it, when you think you've accomplished something, all you've got is nothing except a ball of tangled thread. There are lawsuits now flying around about defamation and all this. Talk about a distraction.
What on earth is the point of the Ontario legislature not only debating the rookie NDP MPP Sarah Jama's post? She has Palestinian roots, and what do you expect she's going to post? But also to even have this debate in the legislature itself on Israel and Hamas and all of this. This is not Ontario provincial issues. I mean, this is not something that, Israel has reached out or someone else has reached out and said, could you please hold this important debate? It's something for the federal government. There's so few issues the federal government actually deals with. Let's leave this one to them. This, you said it off the top, Dave. It's the ultimate distraction for a government that has the RCMP knocking on the door of the Premier's office. And so every question in the legislature this week, and it was our first week back since we learned of the RCMP opening the investigation into the Greenbelt scandal, the government is, first of all, Premier Ford not responding to any questions on this whatsoever, as sending up his House Minister, Paul Calandra, to take all the heat, answer any questions. But he didn't answer questions. He basically just pivoted anything and everything to the NDP housing an anti-Semite and just dissension within their own ranks, because she defied, Jama defied her own leader to say, take that post down. She did apologize for it in a sort of, not an apology that satisfied most people online. Then she pinned the offending tweet to the top of her feed. And then, as you mentioned, there's lawsuits going because she is now suing the Premier, or threatening to sue the Premier. She sent a cease and desist order because he put out a tweet that said basically not only is she a lifelong history of being an anti-Semite, that she supports the rape and murder of Jews. Well, this kind of language, again, from Ontario politicians, who's hearing this? Ontario residents. And what's happening? We had the Muslim Association of Canada coming in and saying, stepped up attacks, verbal assaults, people spitting. These words have consequences, words that are being needlessly thrown about in the Ontario legislature. To what end? Other than for the Ford government to not be answering questions about the RCMP investigation into the Greenbelt scandal. This, it's just obscene the way they're linking this. And I was so impressed with the interim Liberal leader, John Fraser, when he stood up yesterday and said, you know what? This debate about Sarah Jama and censoring her and taking away her right to speak in the legislature. He said it's just too divisive.
It's weaponized is the word he used, right?
Yeah, weaponized. Too divisive. We're tapping out. We're not participating. That was the right move, because the debate should never have been engaged in the first place. This woman is now being demanded that she apologize to the legislature. Well, she's just fired it right back. Sent a lawyer saying, no, Premier Ford, you apologize to me for what you've said. She's clearly not backing down. Now, is she causing her leader some grief? Absolutely. Does the NDP want to be dealing with this issue instead of when they've got the Ford government on the ropes with the RCMP investigation? Of course not. But here's where we are. So this is a real distraction, and for the government, it helps them. It hurts the NDP. It hurts the new NDP leader. But what does it achieve other than, again, as I say, to serve the government's purpose to just talk about anything other than the Greenbelt scandal and the police investigation?
Well, last week, John, we were talking about Marit Stiles and how she had taken the bull by the horns and the whole thing. She had seemed to have the opportunity to create a bipartisan tone in the legislature by, calling on the various integrity and accountability commissioners to, wage their investigations into the Ford government. She did really well at the NDP gathering in Hamilton on the weekend. And boy, things turn in a hurry. You knew that she was up between a rock and a hard place as soon as the tweet went up. And then you begin to look at the what were her options. I mean, if she really scolds and kicks her out, I suppose that's a good thing. But they've got issues within the party on the whole matter of Israel and Palestinians.
Well, sure they do, and it was even evident with McMaster University and the unions and what they had come out to say, which was controversial. So I would agree with Keith and you that this is a distraction for the government, which clearly they'd rather talk about this than something else. But it's also a case of how we do our politics nowadays. It's all about sharp angles and sharp ends of the stick and wedges and all of that sort of stuff. So you can actually see here in the politics of it, let's not forget Thornhill and where Melissa Lantsman is and where Peter Sherman was. I mean, it's a very significant Jewish population and also other parts of the metropolitan Toronto area. So there was probably an expectation that they would come out with the sharp end of the stick. So this is easy bait. And it puts the NDP on the defensive to, try and manage it. So I don't want to get into the particulars of who's going to sue who over what. I mean, trying to stop someone from speaking in the legislature is a non-starter anyways. It will, and if the leader of the NDP is not going to bounce somebody from caucus, well, then I don't know where it goes from there, except everybody has a vote, and then you get it on the record, and then you send a newsletter out to everybody saying, see, we stood with Israel, blah, blah, blah. The other side of this, though, is on the investigation by the RCMP and the Greenbelt issue. And that is it. I'm not sure I would advise the premier to be saying anything on that issue. I mean, once it's under investigation, it is. And yes, I know you have to leave it to Paul Callander to say something in the House. And he seems to be, as we've said many times before, the magician that, makes things go away, whether it's long-term care or some of the other issues. So he's managing it there. What was interesting to me, though, was where he clearly, no, that's not fair. When they asked the question about who was going to pay for the legal fees, there seemed to be some hesitation in terms of answering the question. And after he came out of the legislature, he bolted from view and went on from there. And then it was the Premier's office that came out not too long after that. I think it was about 4 hours, and said, no, everybody's on their own. We're not paying for the legal fees for any of these folks. And that came from the Premier's office, which is a bit interesting because you don't normally have that. I mean, the government pays for normally anybody who is either there or a former member, and it's dealing with government. So I thought that was a bit interesting, where if the RCMP lays any charges, the individuals themselves may be held responsible for the cost of defending themselves, as opposed to what the government would have done. So I found that an interesting quirk to the whole thing. But I don't disagree with both of you, and that is that this is a distraction and a welcome one if you can be dealing with this and not that. But on the other hand, you don't necessarily have to answer every question on this and say, look, it's under investigation. We're not going to prejudice anything that might cause an issue for the outcome or impede the investigation of the RCMP, and sit down. I mean, that's kind of what you can.
Well, this is a slow burn, though. Let's face it. I mean, we've seen these things happen before, and any kind of police investigation in this kind of context. We go back to even the gas plants. I mean, that took years in terms of having it fully resolved. So this will be a slow burn, and I think their bigger worry, Keith, is that it drags on long enough that it gets into election campaign territory, and then all of a sudden something gets dropped in the middle of that.
Absolutely, and it certainly could drag on until election territory in 2026. I mean, what we saw, I thought the NDP was smart. As you say, they know the government's going to say, we can't talk about the RCMP investigation. So they went back on getting the Premier's cell phone records again. And this time, it's not just on the Greenbelt. They started linking it. We need to know who you're talking to about ministerial zoning orders, who you're talking about Ontario Place, about Highway 413. There's backroom deals being made on the Premier's cell phone, allegedly by the NDP. They want to have the records for this. And the Premier's office is, of course, fighting the release of those records. Great question from the NDP leader, Merritt Stiles. What do you got to hide? Why are you hiding this? And, of course, the Premier's office just comes right back with, the Premier, all he's doing in that phone is, looking after a pothole for Little Miss Jones, I believe was the phrase he used. And then Calandra picked up on Little Miss Jones, and that's what the Premier's doing on his phone. He's not making backroom deals to, get Greenbelt lands unprotected. He's helping someone get a pothole filled. Maybe 10 years ago when he was a member of the Toronto City Council, but I don't think that's what he's doing as Premier. It's absurd, but they're still extremely vulnerable on this whole thing of secret deals. The secrecy surrounding all of this, surrounding the 95-year lease at Ontario Place. But in particular, the Greenbelt, and they're fighting. The Information and Privacy Commissioner ordered the government to comply with an FOI request on the involvement of the Premier and the Minister in meeting with developers and to meet their request to, I believe it was dismantle the Greenbelt was the allegation. Well, Environmental Defense has launched a lawsuit on that this week. That's going to keep this forefront, especially if they can start getting discovery, get some things on the record. Do we have the Premier and the Minister? I mean, they've denied involvement directly in the selecting of the lands that are now being reversed back into it. But there may be a lot more here in Environmental Defense, and they're being applauded by Green Leader Mike Schreider because they said this might be the only way to get at the real truth of what really happened in the Greenbelt scandal. How did the developers get their particular lands set free? Was it really just by an errant chief of staff in the Ministry of Housing, or were there higher elected officials involved? I think this is really going to haunt the government. And at the same time, in that background, Dave, as you said, the Mounties take their own sweet time on these things. And so that it could be very close to the election by the time they come out and say, even if they say, no, there's nothing here, but it took us 2 years to figure that out, that means there was a lot of stuff there. Or it ends up like Justin Trudeau did, and the RCMP dropped the investigation because the federal government refused to release documents. I don't know. If Ford sees that, he may, well, okay, well, then we're not going to, although he's vowed to cooperate. They could go the other way and just stonewall this.
Yeah, but I think the other thing that probably heartened the Ford government this week was the polling out that showed that they were back up to 40%. So, let's keep this in context that, Mr. and Mrs. Front Porch, and particularly those outside of the GTA, this is kind of another issue that's around the GTA as opposed to affecting them. There's lots of conservatives who are not being affected by them. And secondly, it does come down to choice. So I go back to this and say, I agree with both of you that this is a slow burn issue. You don't know where it's going to end up. On the other hand, I think that the reversal is the message that got out. The reversal in where not only the Premier stood, but all of the caucus, bringing all of them together for the presser. And, so that they all could go back to their constituents and say what they did. So on a communications point of view, one could argue that the poll itself reflected that sea change and things are, better with the ship. And as a result, you do want to get onto other things. But I don't think they're going to for a while. And it's too early to say, look, just kind of rag the puck until you're out of here by the end of the year. It's October. We're not even through Halloween. But I do think that they could probably breathe a sigh of relief if their own internal polling is reflecting what they were seeing there. And, they can now move on to other issues. So I don't discount that this is a slow burning issue. And at the end of the day, it may have some.
Well, here's a front burner for them.
In the short term, I think they've done okay.
Go to the front burner if they get a teacher strike.
Well, but that's going to mean more than this.
Yeah,
right?
That's what I mean. That'll just jump right to the front of everybody's concern. Now we do have something that's absolutely province wide, and we've got two of the big unions now saying, no, we're not taking that the one that the high school teachers took. In fact, that's got to be causing some great dissension in the back rooms of the unions here. I mean, agreeing to go to binding arbitration right off the bat. So the other unions are not agreeing to that, and they've taken strike votes with, you get your usual 95% mandates. Not surprising, but it could be, the government wants a channel changer away from the Greenbelt. This could do it for a short while, that's for darn sure. But I'm not so cynical as to suggest that they would want to trigger a teacher strike themselves, the government.
But they don't want to waste a crisis either.
But sometimes there's crises that can be taken advantage
of. Sure.
And governments can, if they can see it coming, they can plan to take advantage of it. So let's cynically leave that.
Well, that was John Snoblin's
that was the thing,
point, wasn't it?
And this government is compared a lot to the Mike Harris government. So I mean, let's create a crisis and fix education for you. I mean, well,
I was reflecting this morning on exactly this topic and thinking, there's that joke where a former premier goes up to see God at the pearly gates, and they go through the checklist, and he finally turns to God and says, when are they ever going to come to peace with the government and the teachers? Like, when are we going to stop all that fighting? And God looks at him and says, not in my lifetime. And I think, there's a lot to be said for the fact that whether you're a parent or a student, as I was at Markham High School, and the strike took place, it doesn't matter what stripe you are, what government you are, what you offer at the table, the inevitability of some kind of job action takes place. So we do see that over, the eras. I also reflect on the fact that the teachers have rarely lost anything. I mean, they've always gained in whatever the subsequent bargaining has got them. So that's always worked. But then the arbitration also, if you take a look at the history of arbitration in this province, it always favors the other side. So I suppose it's 6 of one and half a dozen.
Sorry, when you
other.
say the other side, you mean the union, John? Yeah, right.
Yeah, the union. It's never been for
the
incumbent government. It's always been for the other side being the union. And so I guess you could be 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, where this is just the way things go. There are very few other unions that affect our lives and affect our, intergenerational history with things than teachers. But I mean, you can go back over the last 40 or 50 years they've never really lost. They may have lost some credibility in the short term, but I'm sorry, but either way, they're going to get paid or they're going to get things done for them. And so at the end of the day, the government, in a way, always.
Well, I still come back to the whole idea that if it's this much of a crisis and critical and it's an issue, then just declare it an essential service. Let's move on. And to the point, and if that's the case, we rely on arbitration. I keep repeating, the TTC is now an essential service, has been so for a long time, and we do not hear hue and cry about, oh my God, look what the transit workers are getting because of arbitration. There's never been a peep, and we haven't had a strike, and we haven't had the city shut down. Now we got a lot of other problems with transportation gridlock as a result, but to think that somehow if we went that route, it was going to cost us more in the long run. Man, uninterrupted education programming, I'm thinking, is way more valuable than worrying about whatever the margins are around that arbitration settlement.
I think you're bang on with this. People would much rather have that peace in education. I think, the arbitration things are what they are. I mean, interest-based arbitration tends to favor the labor group because the government has the ability to pay or the ability to raise money to pay. I think, John, the teachers did lose something or eventually lost something, which was the bankable sick days. They used to be able to cash out a couple of months worth, if not more, and those days are gone. So there was something done. But I remember as well, I mean, when Kathleen Wynne won the Liberal leadership, and it was at the Maple Leaf Gardens, and the teachers were outside, and, they were very happy with the Liberal government, and they immediately blocked all the traffic until she agreed to add $500 million into the teachers' budgets. They're never happy. Is something that many a labor or someone who's had to negotiate them would say they're never happy. They're always looking for more, and that's true. That's what they do. But they push sometimes too far. But they get what they want in the end. They generally get what they want.
Yeah, I mean, we could spend a lot of time just talking about the history of unions in this province, And there is public support to declare them an essential service. I mean, I've done polling on that, and it's shown it to be the case not only during this disputes that take place, but in the off season as well. People don't want this disruption. But again, I go back to the tactics of negotiation with unions. It doesn't matter whether you're Ford or GM or teachers or whatever. When you have a union involved, or even Metro Groceries, I mean, it is frontline action. The only one that seems to be faltering on that line is the TVO strike, which they came out in the last few days and said, please, can we go to arbitration, please? It's like, have we had enough? And I don't know what TVO is going to do in that case, but that's a rarity, but they're not, you can't declare TVO and the unions around that an essential service. It doesn't really, you're not going to get the public up in arms over anything like that. But again, I'm not sure that the teachers are going to lose on this. It's just part of the process that we've become used to over the last 50 years.
I talked to Kathleen Wynne yesterday on Now and Next, and we got into conversation around, she was in Ottawa in front of the Senate committee talking about this new guaranteed income bill. And, she was all piss and vinegar on, we got to do this and we got to get together and we got to make sure that people are raised up out of poverty. And I said, okay, but what did you do while you were sitting in the chair, right? You didn't do anything to raise ODSP. Well, we did this. I said, no, but did you spend the money where you should have? Would it have made more sense to take that cash and give it to those who are living with disabilities, who can't work, and so on? And she readily admitted, yeah, you know what? We probably should have done a whole lot more.
Yeah, they had a nice, shiny new program with the universal basic income.
Well, she said that was introduced too late. If she had done it again, I would have done it. The first thing I did when I stepped in. So it's interesting to hear how, that bit of distance from the park. And I'm not questioning her intentions on that perspective, but you don't often get that from somebody saying, yeah, you know what? We probably didn't do a very good job on that.
Well, especially when history is staring you right in the face and people on ODSP are living on $1,160 a month.
$1,308 now.
Oh,
yeah, big raise.
That's going to get you what in Toronto or anywhere, and not just Toronto. I mean, good God, anywhere in the GTHA. What are you going to get for rent? Okay, how much of that can you allocate for food, transportation? It's unlivable. And we've discussed this before, and I don't want to go right down on this road on a big tangent, but of course, we have people on disability supports who aren't getting enough money, but we will pay to give them medical assistance in dying.
Yeah.
What on earth has society come to when we're at that point? I see the same when I see the tents. I was past Island Gardens last weekend again. I mean, good God, where's our compassion, our heart? This, Kathleen Wynne is right. Money should have been spent much earlier there, but she's also right about the universal basic income. If you give people enough money, and we saw this during COVID, so many things change, including the health outcome. People just have such a better circumstance if they get a universal basic income, and it's something that we as a society can not only afford, it pays benefits, it pays for itself. We've seen this with the studies. Look at the food bank usage that's gone. What's it gone up? Quadruple?
Well, I was at the AGM, the Daily Bread AGM this week, and Neil was throwing some numbers around, Neil Hasington, the CEO. This year, they now spend $22 million on groceries. $22 million. That's in the before times, it was $1.5 million a year. So the numbers are staggering, John.
Yeah, they are, but I want to push back a little bit on Kathleen Wynne. I mean, this is a government that just spent on everything. So, yeah, we should have spent it then. Well, we're spending it on absolutely everything and tanking the deficit significantly. And then, when she lost the election, they just went up to Ottawa, all of the staffers who were involved, and look where we are today. I mean, we're paying, what is it, $44 billion a year now on the debt to be serviced. And I don't think from day one, Justin Trudeau really gave a crap about whether there was going to be a big deficit or not, because he never adhered to balancing the budget, wasn't prudent. And it was always that phrase of, comparing it to GDP. Well, look where we are today. So I don't know what she was doing, in Ottawa. It's laudable that she's going to make a statement. And if it's on this issue, go ahead and do it. But the late Hugh Segal had it all buttoned down. I mean, this debate, in a sense, with her is over. I mean, there was a plan. It was implemented, and then it was shot in the head by Dean French in the corner office as soon as the Ford government took over. In other words, you don't need to discuss it anymore. You just need to try it out. So it's kind of like, here's the plan. Just put it on for, a year or two, and we'll find out. So if the NDP or the Liberals want to take this up in the House, they actually have a blueprint as to where it should go. But I'm not really so sure that the government wants to do that, because it doesn't want to spend that amount of money. So I actually am on your side. Again, I'm agreeing with you both so much this morning.
You slept well last
but
night.
I'm differing.
You must be wrong on something.
Yeah. No, but I'm agreeing with you on both points. That this is a really important issue, and it's a critical one, especially nowadays. But I can't take from Kathleen Wynne or any politician who say, we should have spent money on that. When, all right, well, just when does it stop? And so I do think there's a blueprint for this. If anything, the Ford government should probably put the blueprint to see whether it works, whether there is a modest saving, or whether there.
Well, here's the kicker, John. While Kathleen Wynne was in the committee room waiting to have her say, they've got one of the finance guys in front of the committee, and the committee says, "Well, so where would we save money if we did this?" And the answer essentially was, "Oh, we didn't look at that."
Yeah.
I mean, what the hell?
Yeah. Which is the same thing. There was an interesting session that Matt Gurney and The Line put together this week, and it was a discussion about, I think the topic was, has Toronto gone nuts? And what it was a panel made up of people who were in the Toronto area, and it focused on Leslieville and the drug issue and the safe injection sites. And it really was very interesting to see how it had evolved over time, and how the parents had been welcoming of it in the first place, and then it just basically got out of control. And, what was made there is something that I think we don't do enough of. And it was, it's easy to say that we've spent $14 million on a program and that we are doing our very best to help people, but there's no measurement of the output. And taking a look at what the success rate is, because once you put the 14 million or whatever amount it is, and you're trying to be compassionate about this, you have stakeholders that suddenly are at the gate, that if you say, look, I don't want needles on my front lawn, and why should I be cleaning them up when you should be, then you're smeared automatically as being someone that doesn't want to help people, get off of drugs and things like that. And I think, again, this is a simple measure issue where, to your point, were we saving?
What are the
money?
outcomes?
Were people getting off of it? Like, I don't know.
Nobody's asking. Nobody's measuring. Exactly. Yeah.
Correct.
So anyway, I just thought it was a kind of a compelling piece. The other thing, I asked her was what's going on in Doug Ford's head, and I don't ask her to be political about it. You sat in the chair and you faced that kind of stuff, and she said, well, clearly, you're tested to actually have to listen to people around you, and make sure that you've got that intention in sight and moving forward. But at the same time, she said, we've already seen hints of it in media reporting, that the caucus is kind of standing up on its hind legs here, right, to some degree. And the reason that he pulled it back was not so much that he saw Jesus, it's that they all went to their constituencies, and that's all they heard about Greenbelt, about whatever it might have been. So, the idea that caucus may not have much to say on this issue, it'd be curious to see how they shape whatever happens in the coming weeks and months around Greenbelt versus what comes out of the premier's office.
They're back at 40%. They're back at 40%.
They're going to do what Doug says at this point. If it looks like he can lead them into another majority, they're going to stick with him again, unless we get something that really stings to him. And the RCP investigation has that possibility. But now he's back at 40%. I mean, how many times has John told us that's majority government territory?
Yeah.
And they bounce right back up. The apology, as you said, I agree completely, John. That apology and reversal is the one message that got through. Everything else then about, he forced the municipalities to expand their boundaries and the MZOs and all. It's
Wah, wah,
not
wah,
ring.
wah,
Yeah,
wah.
yeah. It's
Yeah,
more and more. He
yeah.
he changed his mind. He apologized. What do you people
Yeah.
want? Which is essentially the government's position. We've done what you wanted us to do. And I'm trying to think of the specific program it was under Dalton McGuinty, but they were getting set to brief the media, and Matt Maychek, his chief of staff at the time, he came out, and I had a little briefing with him outside, and he told me it was coming down, and I said, well, what's that going to add to the hydro bill? And I'll be back. And he told me later, they'd been meeting all day, hadn't discussed amongst themselves, whatever, I forget what the plan was, that actual outcome.
Right.
What's the
cost?
bottom line to the bill?
Yeah.
What's it going to cost the taxpayer? And they literally, oh shit, okay. And he went back in and he said, Keith Leslie asked one of those damn Keith Leslie questions. The most basic one of all, the one that is all, that my point being, this is not forefront of thought in Liberals when they're looking at new programs. The cost, okay, but we're just going. This is such a great benefit to the people. Who wouldn't care? Who's going to worry about running up a deficit? This is going to be a great benefit. They so firmly believe in what they're doing, they lose sight of the actual cost, or even of the people that are going to be impacted, the cost to them. And I think the federal carbon tax, perfect example.
I like to remind people that time, if you had a physics equation, it would be something like, time, squared plus issues plus opposition, divided by geography. So if you had all of that in one package, you'd be able to look at it dimensionally. So again, you've got until 2026. You've got a new leader who's going to be elected by the Liberals, who has got her own issues nowadays, having been, Mississauga was just denied housing funding because they don't want fourplexes out there, and the minister was able to bat that away. I mean, Mississauga's got its own issues, and you can even stand up now and say, look, when you were mayor there, this is what happened, and you're not in favor of density and all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, there's that. The other part of it is time and geography matter. Geography, if it's outside of Toronto, then it's a different constituency. Always remember that. If I look at the federal situation now, I have a friend of mine that I meet in the dog park every once in a while, and I respect his views, and I've known him for many, many years. But, he said to me about a month or so ago, Trudeau's cooked. He's done. He should go out the door. And it's kind of like, yeah, but call me back in June of this coming year, because he doesn't have to go until the following year. And now we even hear rumblings about Jagmeet Singh and, about the pharmacare, which will, just cost more and more and more. And that could put them on a collision course to pull the plug or to break the agreement. I don't think it will, because the NDP don't have any money, and it would be ridiculous for them to go at this time. And he kind of looked at me and he said, yeah, but they're done. And it's kind of like, you don't know where you're going to be 6 months from now, let alone 6 weeks from now. So things can happen. Secondly, if you look at how much you want to get in order to survive, and I use the word survive, then we've seen lots of minority governments come and go in our time. And the Trudeau government is no less. I mean, when he gets 28% in the polls, he can turn around Trudeau and say, well, I just need 32. And I need the NDP to come up in theirs, and we're back to where we started from. The one thing that's not happening for the Trudeau government at the moment is that they've lost Atlantic Canada, where you are, Keith, and they desperately need that in order to survive. So I don't know how he's going to get it back. But more importantly, you look into Quebec, and they're having their lunch eaten. Like, they are just starting to tank. And if you put the Maritimes together where they're voting and Quebec at this stage, they're kind of back to the days following Kim Campbell. I mean, they could get very seriously wiped out in many parts of the country. We're nowhere close to that in Ontario. We've got lots and lots of roadway to go. So I do think that people have got to look not just at the issues and the polling at 40% or whatever, but where is it coming from? And if it's outside of the core of the city of Toronto and they're getting that support, it means that it's much higher than 40% in those other areas. So again, what do? Well, maybe on this one, you decide to rag the puck on the issue by saying, not going to talk about it, not going to prejudice anything. If you want to talk about it, that's fine. But we're going to make sure that we've got all the bases covered, and we're going to make sure that we don't prejudice the outcome of whatever investigation there is. On to the next issue. But the next thing is, what issues are you going to have to drive the agenda? And I think this is where the Ford government is going to have to pick 2 or 3. And I don't think I don't think it should be, an attack on the opposition, but they have to get back in the saddle, and they have to say the agenda for the next couple of months is going to be X, Y, and Z. And it's probably going to be more than teachers, but they've got to get back on track where they can look at the polls and say, well, we're out of the woods so far on that, but we have to have an agenda to move forward. I don't see that yet emerged.
Well, they're going to put a nursing home in every community. They're going to build a new nursing home everywhere. And they're going to make those announcements locally. They've been rolling them out for months now, and they're going to continue to do that. I think their infrastructure programs that they have hang everything on, they're going to continue to hang everything on. They just firmly believe they are on the right track.
Well, and that's going to play well, whether it's outside or inside Toronto then, right? I mean, that kind of levels the playing field for sure. All right, that'll do it for us this week. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. Thanks to Keith Leslie and John Wright. I'm Dave Trafford for Story Studio Network.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.